Story number 1, Holding Room 3. I was assigned to overnight evidence processing at the County Law Enforcement Center on the 16th of March, 2024. The shift ran from 10 in the evening until 6 the following morning. I had been working evidence intake for 3 years at that point, mostly property crimes and vehicle recoveries. The assignment that night involved cataloging items from an abandoned sedan found on Forest Service Road 12, approximately 18 miles northeast of the county line. The vehicle had been reported by a forestry contractor on the 14th. No plates, no registration in the glove box, no personal effects that would indicate ownership. The recovery team brought in 4 evidence bags. I logged the contents at my station starting at 10:45. Clothing, a road atlas from 2006, a plastic water bottle, receipts from a gas station in Billings dated 8 months prior. Standard items for an abandonment case. The 4th bag contained 17 pocket watches. They were identical. Silver casing, Roman numerals, no manufacturer marks I could identify. I documented each one individually per protocol, noting that all 17 were stopped at 3:41. I did not note whether that was morning or afternoon because the watches had no indicator. It struck me as unusual, but unusual is not the same as concerning. Rural drug trade often involves bulk purchases of items for resale or barter. I have processed stranger collections. I finished the intake log at 11:53 and began photographing each item for the digital record. The watches photographed poorly. The images came out overexposed regardless of the lighting adjustments I made. I noted this in the file and moved on to secondary documentation. At approximately 1:15 in the morning, I heard ticking. I stopped typing and listened. The sound was coming from the evidence table. I walked over and observed that all 17 watches were now running. The second hands moved in perfect synchronization. I checked my notes. I had not wounded them. No one had entered the processing room since I began the shift. I documented the observation and called the on-call supervisor, Deputy Morris. He asked if I had touched the watches. I said I had not, beyond the initial handling required for intake. He told me to continue processing and note any further changes. He did not sound concerned. I returned to the photographs. By 1:40, I had completed the visual record and began entering the data into the county system. The ticking continued. I found it difficult to concentrate, not because of the volume, but because of the uniformity. 17 watch movements producing a single sound. At 2:30, I noticed the second hands were moving counterclockwise. I stood and watched for a full minute to confirm. All 17 watches were ticking backwards at the same rate they had previously ticked forward. I checked the evidence bags. Condensation had formed on the inside of the plastic, small droplets clinging to the surface. The processing room maintained a controlled environment. Humidity was regulated to prevent degradation. I checked the wall monitor. 62% humidity, 20 degrees Celsius. Normal range. I called Deputy Morris again. He did not answer. I left a message describing the observation and stated I was moving the watches to cold storage per contamination protocol. I gathered the evidence bags and walked to the evidence room at the end of the hall. The room required keycard access. I swiped my card and heard the lock disengage. I pushed the door open, entered, and let it close behind me. The cold storage unit was along the back wall. I placed the bags inside and sealed the unit. When I turned to leave, the door would not open. I pushed the handle. It did not move. I swiped my keycard again. The reader light turned green, and I heard the lock mechanism cycle, but the handle remained fixed. I examined the door frame. No visible obstruction. I braced my shoulder against the door and pushed. It did not move. I used my radio to call the front desk. No response. I tried Deputy Morris again. No response. I tried the main dispatch line. The radio produced static, then silence. I checked my phone. No signal. I returned to the cold storage unit and opened it to verify the watches were secure. They had all stopped at 3:40, again. The condensation inside the bags had frozen into small crystals. At 2:58, I heard the sound Deputy Morris later refused to let me describe in the official report. I documented it in my notes as repetitive metallic percussion from an undetermined source. It was coming from the ventilation system. The sound was rhythmic. It matched the ticking pattern the watches had produced. I made the decision to disable the environmental monitoring system in the evidence room. I am not authorized to do that. I accessed the control panel near the door and switched the system to manual override. The ventilation stopped. The sound stopped. I moved the evidence bags from the cold storage unit to the industrial freezer we use for biological samples. I sealed them inside and locked the unit. This fell outside standard chain of custody procedure. I documented the decision in my notes. At 3:40, the door opened. I did not touch it. I was standing near the freezer when I heard the lock disengage and saw the door swing inward. The hallway beyond was empty. I left the evidence room and returned to my processing station. I completed the remaining intake paperwork and filed the case summary. I noted equipment malfunction as the reason for the delay. Deputy Morris arrived at 5:30 for an early check-in. I told him the watches had been damaged during processing due to environmental contamination and recommended disposal under evidence degradation protocols. He asked if I had completed the documentation. I said I had. He told me to go home. The day shift supervisor, Lieutenant Haynes, called me at 9 that morning. She said the vehicle recovery case had been transferred to federal jurisdiction and that I was being reassigned to administrative duties pending a routine procedural review. She did not specify which federal agency. She did not ask about the watches. I returned to the center the following week for the review. Lieutenant Haynes and a man I did not recognize were present. He did not introduce himself. He asked me to describe the overnight shift in detail. I provided my account. He asked if I had retained any personal notes. I said I had not. He thanked me for my cooperation. The procedural review concluded with no findings. I was returned to evidence processing on day shifts. The vehicle recovery case does not appear in the county system. I checked. The abandoned sedan was listed as disposed through salvage auction. No evidence items were recorded. Story number 2, Relay Station 6. I arrived at the relay station at 1400 hours on the 23rd of October, 2019. The access road had deteriorated since my last inspection in July. Erosion from autumn storms had carved a channel through the final switchback, forcing me to park the service truck 60 yards below the summit and hike in with my equipment cases. The station itself sat in a clearing of scrub pine, a prefabricated shelter no larger than a garden shed, painted forest service green. The door stood 3 inches ajar. I noted this immediately because the tamper, evidence seal stretched across the frame, unbroken. Its holographic strip intact and properly aligned with the reference mark I had made in permanent ink during the previous inspection. I documented this with photographs before entering. The interior was as I had left it: 2 equipment racks, a climate control unit, a fire suppression canister, and a wall-mounted emergency radio. All status indicators showed green. The air smelled stale, but not foul. I checked the environmental logger first, as is standard procedure. The device records temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure in 15-minute intervals. The temperature readings were wrong. Over the previous 6 weeks, the interior had fluctuated between 32 and 78 degrees Fahrenheit. The climate control unit maintains a constant 65 degrees and logs any deviation beyond 2 degrees as a fault condition. It had logged no faults. I verified its function with a handheld thermometer, 64.7 degrees. I made a note to replace the environmental logger and moved on to the primary equipment inspection. The VHF repeater showed normal operational hours and no error codes. The backup battery array measured acceptable voltage but had reached its replacement interval, so I began the swap procedure. This required powering down the repeater, which created a 12-minute service window. During this window, the emergency radio, which operates on independent power and antenna systems, becomes the only active transmission equipment on site. While disconnecting the old batteries, I noticed the emergency radio's activity log was accessible through a small LCD panel on its face. I had never needed to check it before. Emergency radios at these stations are sealed units, activated only by a physical key switch, and are tested annually by a separate division. The log showed 4 transmissions. Each occurred at 0300 hours. The first was dated October 5th. The most recent was that morning. I unlocked the radio's maintenance panel with the key from my authorization binder. The transmission log memory was empty. No stored messages, no test tones, no data. The physical lockout switch, which must be turned to enable transmission, remained in the disabled position. I confirmed this 3 times. The switch is a mechanical interlock. It cannot be bypassed without tools and knowledge of the unit's interior wiring. I photographed the log screen, the empty memory, and the lockout switch position. Then I powered the repeater back online and called regional dispatch on my handheld radio. I described the discrepancy in procedural language. The dispatcher, a woman named Carolyn, whom I had worked with for 4 years, told me to complete the standard inspection checklist and submit my documentation upon return to the field office. She did not sound concerned. The antenna mount required inspection next. I went back outside and climbed the 20-foot tower bolted to the shelter's roof. The mount showed no corrosion or stress fractures. The coaxial connections were tight and properly weatherproofed. While I was photographing the mounting bolts, I looked south along the ridgeline. 3 other relay stations are visible from this elevation on clear days. I could see all 3. At 16:30 hours by my watch, the emergency radio transmission indicators at all 4 stations illuminated simultaneously. The lights are bright enough to see at this distance, small red points against the dark equipment shelters. They remained lit for what I estimated to be 12 seconds, then extinguished together. I descended the tower and retrieved my handheld radio. I switched to the emergency frequency and listened. I heard only carrier tone, a flat hiss that indicates an open channel with no modulation. No voice, no data burst, no interference pattern. After 30 seconds, the carrier dropped and the channel went silent. I waited 15 minutes. The phenomenon did not repeat. I completed my checklist, verified all seals and locks, and secured the shelter. The new tamper evidence seal went across the door frame. I marked it with my initials and the date. During the hike back to my truck, I reorganized my equipment cases to balance the weight. In the bottom of the secondary case, beneath the spare coaxial fittings, I found 3 tamper evidence seals. They were the correct type for relay station doors, individually numbered and logged to my field authorization. I had brought 2 seals with me that morning, one for use, one for backup. I had used one. I should have had one remaining. I now had 4. I inspected them under the truck's dome light. They were genuine, not counterfeit. The holographic strips displayed the proper micropattern. The serial numbers fell within a range issued to my division in August. I checked my authorization binder. None of the numbers were logged to me. I placed all 3 in an evidence bag and sealed it. My report was filed the following morning. I included all photographs, the environmental logger data, the emergency radio log screen images, and the 3 unaccounted seals. I wrote the narrative in the standard format, without interpretation or speculation. I noted only what I had observed and what I could not explain. The response came 6 days later. The environmental logger was classified as faulty and scheduled for replacement. The emergency radio transmissions were attributed to electrical malfunction caused by moisture intrusion. The seals were determined to be a documentation error during inventory processing. My report was accepted and filed under equipment malfunction, Category 3. The relay station was redesignated for monthly inspection instead of quarterly. I was reassigned to Lowland Tower maintenance in the Eastern District, effective immediately. The reassignment memo cited operational efficiency and did not reference my report. I learned 5 months later, through a routine division email, that the Ridgeline relay station had been decommissioned. The memo provided no reason. Decommissioned stations are typically listed with justification codes, equipment age, redundancy, budget reallocation. This one had none. I have maintained Lowland Towers since that reassignment. I have not been dispatched to unmanned ridge stations. My clearance level has not changed. The incident is closed in all official records I am permitted to access. Story number 3, Courthouse Annex. I was assigned to catalog and prepare records for transfer from a condemned courthouse annex in eastern Kentucky. Standard demolition archival work scheduled for 3 days. The building had been constructed in 1927 and abandoned since 2008, when the county consolidated its offices. My role was to identify materials of historical value, separate them from routine documents, and prepare everything for either transfer or destruction according to state retention schedules. The basement filing room contained approximately 2,000 linear feet of case files, most dated between 1946 and 1972. The original clerk system was still in place, organized by year and docket number, with each file box labeled in faded ink on water-stained cardboard. The room had no windows, one entrance, and overhead lighting that worked intermittently. I brought battery lamps and began processing the 1946 files on the morning of day 1. The work was routine. I photographed each box before opening it, logged the contents, flagged items for retention, and marked processed boxes with orange tape and my initials. By the end of the first day, I had completed 1946 through 1951, approximately 300 linear feet. I sealed the exterior door with tamper-evident tape as required and left the site at 6:15 in the evening. On the second morning, I noticed that files I had already processed and marked were appearing in different locations. 3 boxes from 1948 were now positioned in the 1962 section. The orange tape and my initials were still on them. I checked my logs and photographs. The boxes had definitely been in the correct location when I left. I assumed someone had accessed the room overnight. though I could not determine why they would move already processed materials. I documented the discrepancy and continued working, but made a note to mention it during my next check-in call. By mid-morning, I found 5 more boxes out of place. All were boxes I had processed the previous day. All still bore my markings. I confirmed my seals on the exterior door were intact and had not been tampered with. I began photographing file locations before processing each new box, creating a visual record in case the issue continued. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I reviewed photographs I had taken at 1:15. 4 boxes visible in the earlier images were no longer in those positions. I walked the room and found them relocated to a different shelf, approximately 20 feet away. I had been alone in the room for the entire period between photographs. I contacted my supervisor and explained the situation. She instructed me to continue documentation while she arranged for a site security assessment. I was told to maintain my schedule and keep detailed logs of any further irregularities. I returned to the files. Within minutes, I watched a box shift 4 inches to the left while I was standing less than 6 feet away. There was no vibration, no sound, no physical cause I could identify. I photographed it, noted the time, and stepped back. Over the next hour, files began relocating while I remained in the room observing them. The movements were small, incremental but consistent. Boxes slid along shelves or rotated slightly. I did not touch anything. I only documented. By 3 o'clock, I realized the files were not moving randomly. They were reorganizing themselves. The original system had been chronological by docket number within each year. The files were now sorting themselves by defendant surname alphabetically across all years. I had never seen that system used in any Kentucky county. It was not a format that existed in this jurisdiction's history. I pulled several boxes to confirm. The reorganization was precise. All cases involving defendants with surnames beginning with A were now grouped together, spanning from 1946 to 1972. The same was true for B, C, and onward. I checked my photographs from earlier that morning. The system had been chronological then. It was alphabetical now. I also noticed that several boxes now contained documents, cross-referencing cases from different decades involving the same family surnames. These cross-reference sheets had not been present in my initial review. They were typed on the same aged paper stock as the original files, with the same typewriter font, but they indexed connections I had not documented. At 4:10, I found my own surname in a 1953 case file. I had processed 1953 the previous day. I had reviewed every file from that year. This document had not been there. The case listed a defendant with my exact surname, first and last, involving a property dispute in the same county where my family had lived. I do not have relatives from that area. I have confirmed this through personal records. The case file included a handwritten note referencing a follow-up action scheduled for 2020, for the current year. I ceased all processing immediately. I collected my photographic documentation, my logs, and my equipment. I sealed the basement door and exited the building per evacuation protocol. I did not remove any files. I submitted my documentation to my supervisor by secure upload at 5:40 that evening. She called me within 20 minutes and instructed me not to return to the site. A site closure authorization was issued the following morning. The demolition contract was transferred to a different vendor, with specialized clearance I do not have. I was not asked to provide further testimony or analysis. I was instructed to decline any future assignments in that county and to avoid discussing the incident outside of official channels. The property was demolished 4 weeks later without further archival assessment. No records were transferred. My report was classified under administrative seal and assigned a reference number I am not authorized to access. The incident is listed in my file as a routine site closure due to structural concerns.